sitting here with a bit of sort of minor anxiety about saying, oh no, that's not quite right. But anyway, we shall deal with that stuff. So I've actually read quite a few books on behavioral economics now, and I have also lecture fairly widely about it as well. So I think, there are quite a few really good books on behavioral economics, but I think this is like one of the better ones, more because there's more pages in it, but obviously because Kahneman is essentially, along with the original, architects of it, and he won sort of Nobel Prize in it as well. So this book, for those of you who haven't read it, or those of you who have read it but forgotten about it, this is a very quick summary of some of the themes. And as you know, it's sort of one of those books that sort of roams around a lot. There isn't one sort of central theme that goes through the middle of it. So it's like lots of chapters diving into lots of different spaces and really bringing behavioral economics connecting to lots of other theories that we know, because one of the things is you sort of say, oh my God, there's behavioral economics there, and there's behavior, and no, it's just behavior is there, of which therefore all that behavioral economics is doing is claiming it for itself. So let's not over pretend that behavioral economics is suddenly giving us the whole answer to everything. But fundamentally, the sort of precept that sits at the very heart of this and sits at the very heart of most bits of behavioral economics is we are lousy and we're lazy decision makers. We're not very good about it. And we tend to make decisions upon limited information. And what you see is all there is one of the key themes. So we choose a little bit of information, what's sitting in our salient brain, or how many hands we pick things up with. And therefore, we make incomplete, inaccurate decisions some of the time, not all the time. And bear in mind, we're making somewhere between 10,000 decisions a day, most of which are unconscious decisions. We know that basically we can be easily influenced, and sometimes influenced by seemingly irrelevant and unimportant information. So therefore, it's no surprise that we are not what I would regard as being these perfect, Spock-like models of what economics would call econs. So some key themes, and I'm just trying to bunch these together. So you could put these in other places, and every time I do lectures about this, I tend to put it in other ways. But for now, I'm just going to put them into 4 different categories to make it easy. I'm going to talk about the laziness that we have. I'm going to talk about the role that emotions play. I'm going to talk about the way we perceive things. And also the last one is about performance. So, if any of you have gone down economics at school or university or whatever, you'll know that actually the fundamental principle of economics is this idea that we are rational decision makers, and what we'll do, we will work out the pros and cons of everything. And how behavioral economics first came about is because people realized that's not what happens. We are irrational in our decision making. We are emotionally triggered. And therefore these things tend to massively affect the way we make decisions. And one of the key concepts he talks about, and we've even got the research agency, which has named itself after this stuff, is the system 1 and system 2, which obviously is a slightly more metaphorical thing. There, you can't divide the brain down the middle and say, well, there's the system 1, there's system 2, because they're all interlinked. But there are certain parts, like the neocortex is more system 1, and the amphibious and the limbic brain is much more part of the system 1. But basically, the system 1 is the oldest part of the brain, really sits at the base of it. And it's, we call it the primitive. It's very unconscious. It's very emotionally driven. It doesn't have language. That sits over into the system 2 brain. It's quite intuitive. It's powerful. It has the ability to deal with a lot of information at any one time. It's what I call the size of the Pentagon type computer. And basically, the system 2 is that first little calculator you had at school. That's the size of our rational brain. The trouble is we live in a world that tends to sort of pay homage to this rational part of the brain, when the reality is it's the unconscious part of the brain that is really the dominating force within us. You know, it's able to operate with very low energy levels, but that said, it's very easily influenced because it's a bit lazy. And it's about a meaning making. It's the place that we're creating meaning, we're making sense, we're pulling stuff together. And that becomes one of the flaw points, because we like to, you know, that classic correlation doesn't equal causation. We like to pull things together, make sense of things. And that isn't really often, sort of editorially, rigorously analyzed. The system 2 brain, the new part of the brain, is very the conscious, is the rational, is where many of us think we live, you know, and it's very methodical, but it's very slow processing power. So as soon as it gets tired, basically the system 1 brain takes over. This is why when you're writing that research report, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning time, you're running in energy, you're going to start eating all that stuff, and, you know, and you slow down, you know, you were writing sort of 5 charts an hour before, and now you're down to 1 chart an hour. It really slows down. So heavy users of energy, and not able to control system 1 particularly well, and again is a bit lazy. It'll jump to massive conclusions. So let's first look at the laziness. And, you know, one of the things I always say is, if you want to pretend you know something about behavior, just use this lovely word, heuristics. You know, it sounds good, and they always say, oh, that sounds very clever. You know, and basically all heuristics are is they're basically the shortcuts. And what we know is that if we're making all these thousands of decisions every day, we wouldn't ever get out of bed in the morning if we didn't have shortcuts and some sort of patterns of behavior which we live in. So in that sense, what we are doing is we are relying upon those shortcuts to help us make sense of the world, and therefore make what seems to be, you know, positive behavioral decisions. And the other thing I draw your attention to is brands are, by their very nature, they are heuristics, because when we decide to buy into the Audi brand or buy into the Dove brand or whatever brand it is, we are making some massive assumptions based on past experience of that brand. So we know it's safe, you know, it's doing good stuff, da, 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 da. So therefore, what heuristics do is they help us make easier decisions. And therefore, one of the key things we know is that we stick in unconscious patterns of behavior. Your best definer of the behavior you'll have tomorrow is going to be what you did yesterday, because we like to just sit in those patterns. And you've probably all heard those great stories of these sort of people like Steve Jobs, who always wear black, you know, polo necks, because you said, I don't have the time or the attention to spend on deciding upon small issues like what to wear, you know. So he basically had a ritual which took him out of having to make decisions, because we find making decisions really heavy on the brain. You open the wardrobe, what do you say? Oh, do I wear the polo neck? Do I wear that? What coloured trousers am I going to wear with it? It's like too many decisions. That's why we like almost chunking them all together. And, you know, what we do is, you know, this could have gone into the perception box, but, you know, we see what we believe. So we've made up our minds about what the world looks like and what our hypothesis is. And basically what we therefore do is we use lenses and filters to basically point, you know, our metaphorical camera in the direction of the stuff we believe in. So all that stuff, you know, about, you know, what people follow on their social media sites. Yeah, we're going to follow people who share our views about things. And basically what we'll do is we will delete stuff that doesn't fit with our model of reality, or we'll distort it, or we'll generalize. We'll say, yeah, but that's an outlier. So actually that's because we don't want to have every single time to try to have the burden and the energy to try to make a decision all the time. And we also like, you know, frankly, you know, look, let's use the wisdom of the crowd. Let's do that social influencing. So we know from all those other great books that have been written about this as well, you know, that basically is one of the most powerful influences we have as human beings, that we are going to sort of try it because we want to be accepted, we're going to stay in that framework, and we're going to do what other people do. And so we see these artificially created crowds outside sort of Dishoom and all these other posh restaurants. But I use this example that it must be a good chippy if people are prepared to queue outside the rain. That's the principle. So rather than actually having to make a decision, if other people have made a choice, it's good. Well, frankly, why don't I just go with that one? It's not that big a decision whether I buy chips from one place or buy chips from another place. And sometimes we agonize too much over decisions when there isn't much fault in any of the options. And one of the nice things it talked about is that, you know, if there is a difficult question, we don't try and struggle to answer the question. We basically find, you know, an easy one to answer. So if you remember, you know, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, when they found the magical answer was 42 and they realized they didn't know what the question was. So they had to go and build another, you know, Earth, you know, run by mice, you know, to go and sort of find the right question. You know, so therefore, if you say the question is, you know, what do should I invest in Ford Motor Company? You know, what Conan talks about is you don't really answer that question because that's quite a different one. So, do I like Ford? You know, so therefore that'll be the question you'll answer. So very often we're not really answering the question. We take another question that we can find the answer to, and therefore we're giving the wrong answer. Because we're not really saying, is it good to invest in? We're saying, do we like the brand? You know, and the other thing is this thing about, because System 1 likes to make sense of the world, and actually we are biologically, you know, we store something like 70% of all our memories within story. We're trying to create a narrative, we're trying to pull things together to help us make sense of the world, and through making sense of the world, we then have some degree of perceived, you know, control, which of course is not true, but that's a myth. But it therefore means that we create what are called these illogical narratives between things, you know, and we create correlations, and actually that does, and we therefore imply causation. So one example he talks about is that, you know, there's this myth of sort of, you know, the hot hands idea. Oh my God, he's putting so many baskets away, he's doing that. And we talk a lot about the sports, the curse of being on the cover of Sports Illustrated, that as soon as you go on the front cover, your game suddenly, you know, falls apart. So if that was all that, let's move on to emotions now. And, you know, emotions heavily influence our decision making. I don't know if any of you have read this book, you know, The Chimp Paradox. But it basically takes the same principle, saying like this idea about how do you have the logical side control the emotional side, which actually I find the biggest, yeah, we could review this book as well another time, but I find the book is fundamentally built upon a misguided principle that it thinks that we can rationally control our emotional side, particularly with the power that the emotional side had. You know, when someone is emoting massively, there's no amount of rationality. If they're standing on the top of this brand new bridge that's been built in Portugal and you're looking down 1,000 feet and say, well, no, it's completely safe, it's fine. 2,500 people have walked across it so far. That doesn't change the power of your emotion. Say, I ain't walking on that bridge. So consequently, and we know all the other work from neuroscience has demonstrated, the wonderful case of Phineas Gage, I'm sure that you'll know about, and what sort of Damasio's done, and sort of Zhejiang have also gone and done, have demonstrated about, how we are making many of our decisions emotionally. Some people have, better control of their system ones than other people do. And, he references this lovely study done by sort of Michelle about one marshmallow or two. And I thought, just for a bit of fun, we're just going to play a bit of this because it's a very charming piece of it. It's a recreation, but however, it still makes for a well worthwhile looking at.
chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow, for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
Right, sweetheart.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay.
Very good. They followed up these 4-year-olds about 15 years afterwards. And very interestingly, they found the people who had already developed strategies to resist the emotional pull were basically better human beings by the sounds of it. They had higher IQs, they had greater sort of cognitive powers, they were thinner. So, I therefore put it all down that I would definitely have failed this test. But what you notice is that, there were distraction techniques they were using there. And as soon as you engage emotionally, as soon as you engage more of your senses, so the smelling of it, the licking of it, then basically it reduced your ability. And it talks in the book also about, diets and things like this, about how, the way that these foods are so tempting, the way they are deliciously put together, no wonder it's very difficult that we find difficult to resist it. And obviously our resistance drops when we are emotionally involved. There's another book, by Dan Ariely. He talks a very interesting other situation where he talks about people's perception of being prepared to take part in various, what you might call to be slightly more adventurous sexual activities of spanking and bondage and things like that, and having sex with a much older person. And they found that as soon as once these students were sort of excited, then their level of preparation of doing those things massively increased. And we know that if we are emotionally drawn into something, then our resistance to things is much smaller, much lower. If we're tired, therefore emotions really, that's where the system 1 is really being activated. And we have great difficulty to have a system 2 brain that really controls it. And likewise, the vividness that we can recall something, the emotionality also adds to the vividness. And that therefore changes our ease of recall. And so when people ask, what are the biggest killers tonight? Tornadoes, fireworks, asthma, swimming pools, actually people tend to think it's the more, aggressive ones of tornadoes or maybe volcanoes or, these big things, maybe, aircraft crashes, but actually in reality, it's the small mundane things like asthma and swimming pools, which has a much greater level of causing deaths. And so what we tend to do is our recall is very heavily influenced by our emotions. And the more concrete you can make something, therefore, the more vivid it becomes, the more we can relate to something, then it's going to be able to increasing its saliency. And then we then get this other part of the emotion, which is the power of loss. And, we sort of know that genetically we're wired, because if you go back to the fundamentals of our species, those who were sort of very aware of risk and danger spotted the savannah going down and the saber-toothed tiger coming towards them, whilst the other ones who were just looking at the berries in the trees, who didn't spot one, tended to get eaten for lunch. So consequently, the power of loss sits very heavily within us as a genetic thing. So as another bit of fun, just a bit of a video about how when someone has got in the car, they've stolen the car, whatever, and even though the helicopters are flying overhead, the police cars are chasing them, they don't have the logic to go and say, oh, I think I'll just stop because it's going to be the safest place to go and do that. So we do find that basically, we are risk averse, and therefore it very heavily influences. And whilst, econs would suggest that, we would weigh up the pros and cons, it doesn't quite work, is it? As soon as there is the slightest bit of risk, we get much more elevated in our emotions about that. And therefore that over-dominates our thinking. So we don't make rational decisions then. We go, oh my God, there's a risk. Oh my God, we're going to avoid the risk. So one of the other areas of it is, is this idea of there's a phrase used elsewhere, which is again in behavioral economics, which is we are not optimizers. We're not trying to make the best decision out. Because to make the best decision out, let's say tonight you decide to go home, you want to make a spaghetti passata with olives and clams or something like that, and you're going to go to the supermarket. What you do not do is you do not go and pick up all 12 passatas you've got available to you and carefully weigh up the pros and cons upon each one of them. What you sort of do is you sort of grab one you bought before, because that's the pattern we live in. You may have grabbed the one that's on special offer, and you'll do a compare and contrast. And all you are really doing is you're trying to make the least worst option. So in other words, we are satisficers rather than optimizers. We just don't want to be seen to have done a really bad decision, and a really bad decision would reflect badly upon us. But if we can at least have some judgment, well, it was better than that one, that's what we do. Because we fear that judgment that could happen within us, and we fear being caught out. And we've seen those ads all done that all the time about two people sitting on a plane each side of each other, and one bought at one price, one bought at the other price, or they stay at a hotel, etc. So that's this whole idea about playing off oh, don't get yourself caught out. But we make decisions through a comparison, because that makes it easier for us to go and do that. A nice example was quoted is, imagine you're going for an operation, you speak to one consultant surgeon, and he said, of those who've had this procedure, 90% are still alive after 5 years. And you seek a second opinion from another consultant who says, of those who've had this procedure, 10% are dead after 5 years. Well, when you present this to people, of course, go for option A, even though, as we know, the mathematics is exactly the same, but we just fear that what they've done is they've raised it. So a lot of that stuff's been talked about, present your campaign on the basis of what people are going to lose rather than what they're going to gain. One of the other sort of slightly attached thing is this the theory called endowment theory. What endowment theory sort of suggests is that people increase their value perception of an item once they own it. So they had experiments done where they sort of got to make a judgment and they're given a piece of sort of art, and then afterwards they will then be asked to reassess the scores, and they have increased the value they assign to that space. Or in this case, there was another thing done which was looking at Duke University, well known for its basketball. And basically they found that those who'd won in the lottery the ticket were going to ask significantly amount to sell their ticket than those who wanted to buy it. It was like $170 was the amount people were prepared to buy a ticket for, versus $2,400 they were prepared to sell a ticket. Because once we own something, we feel the loss of it. It's a version of fear of loss. It's ours now. And to give it up, we hate that idea of loss. There was another experiment done when people were invited, imagine you could lose on this toss of a coin, heads you lose $100. How much would you have to win to make you be prepared to take on a potential loss of $100? And the average was 200. So in other words, we value a loss at least twice the level that we value a gain. It's got to be significantly more to make us sort of take on the risk. When actually, economic theory would say that it will just need to be $1 more, because of the way which the coin flops. So let's talk a bit about perception. And, they talk quite a lot about this concept called Wisiati. And Wisiati is what you see is all there is. So this also links back in that Byron Sharp thing we talked the last time about saliency, and I can't remember, years ago, I think it may have been Wendy Gordon who talked about it. We're talking about this principle about the spatial arrangement of brands. And it was a lovely thought about actually brands that you are very salient are right at the front of you versus brands that are less relevant for you are your back, you don't even notice them, they're far back. And this idea is, how do you make things become right there? And we need to create the saliency, because when we're making decisions about anything, we will automatically bring up only those things that are salient. So we'll only bring up the salient facts. So in other words, if salient facts are driven by vividness and by emotion, if you don't have a lot of vividness and emotion attached to it, or if you aren't distinctive, this whole idea about standing out and being the Toblerone, the purple cow, therefore you will not be in the frame to even be considered. So this idea we do have blinkers on is quite an important thing. And sort of one of the, they reference the sort of gorilla idea that, there are people passing a ball around and say, how many passes does the white team make? And you therefore so focus on counting them and say, did you spot the dancing gorilla? And you play back the film and there's a dancing gorilla. You've probably all seen that one, but here's another one, which is another thing which is called the door study.
The door study. This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions. Watch closely as two people carrying a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else. Like many of the people in this study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person. Approximately 50% of the people approached in this study didn't notice when the person they were talking to was replaced by someone else. This study was among the first to demonstrate that change blindness can occur outside of the laboratory. This video is from research.
Thank you. You know, and you know, that's sort of like the classic magician's trick, isn't it? They'll be doing something with this hand, so you don't notice what they're doing with the other hand. You know, which sort of brings me into, you know, the whole Darren Brown thing. And whilst this isn't in the book, this is how I defined it. So there's another principle which I say, which I call Wizzy Out, which is what you see is all you. So basically, this is the priming that irrelevant information is unconsciously used to influence. So what Darren Brown does is, as we've seen with all his great stuff, and for those of you who aren't in the UK, he's one of these like sort of, you know, mind masters who get you to go and rob banks and do amazing things like that. So he's a great theatrical thing. But what he's doing, and you know, is he's planting unconscious influences all along. So, you know, the example I would make up is if you wanted to agree a deal of 4%, you do it on the 4th of April at 4 o'clock in room 4 on the 4th floor, you know, because 4 then becomes anchored into the whole perceptual space which people are thinking about. So what happens is seemingly irrelevant things are taken into account and will influence. So there's an experiment they talk about, is they gave these, again, they do most of these with students, of course, is they give them a list of words. So on the left-hand side, words like wise, astute, accomplished, and they've got to sort of write it into a sentence or something like that. And to another group of people, they give the words senile, dependent, disease, and things like this. And basically what they've got to do is they've got to go down the corridor and give their answers into a secretary down the end of the corridor. But actually, the whole exercise is looking at the way the gait, the height, the speed they walk at before and after this event. And what they noticed is people who were given the senile, dependent, diseased walk slower, more crouched over, you know, than those who had these other more youthful type of perception. So it's showing that irrelevant information somehow gets involved. And therefore context is really important because it brings unconscious meaning to something. So in this experiment that was done, for example, this shape here is seen as a B, but the same shape here, when it's put within the middle of letters, actually becomes, you know, 13, but it's exactly the same shape. So what we put things into, and, you know, we therefore reference, you know, the Tiffany box is, as we always joke, as important as what's inside of it. You know, so branding and all these other influences, you know, the Apple store, the way that staff, you know, within a store help you, all become unconscious influences. And there are lots of great experiments about, you know, that sort of Bang & Olufsen, the weight in the remote control, or with Peugeot cars about how they did a lot of work upon the sound of the door closing to make a solid thunk, because we think a car that makes a tinny sort of noise is going to be less safe than a car that makes a heavy thunk, etc., etc. So we know that all these things do play a role in influencing. And in terms of perception, less is more. So this whole principle about chunking, and you've probably come across, you know, the piece of research done by Alfred sort of Miller, you know, called the magical power of 7 plus and minus 2, which is we can only really hold, you know, 7 bytes of information plus or minus 2, depending upon what you had the night before, how hungover you are, etc. So in other words, the more you crowd information in, the more you make it more difficult to make a decision. So, and I can't remember what books I got it from, but, you know, there's a lovely bit of experiment done with jams, which they basically gave to some people, you know, assessed these 6 jams and basically assessed them, and they got a proper, you know, jam tasters. Yes, they exist. They probably got no teeth, but proper jam tasters. And they said they got them roughly right. So fine. Then they gave them to another group of people, you know, 10 different criteria to judge the jam on, you know, pectin levels, you know, spreadability, sugariness, you know, souriness, you know, consistency, and they had to rate each of these 6 jams on 10 different criteria on a rating of 10. And when they did that, their scores were completely wrong. So actually, you know, a lot of work has been shown that basically, you know, you give people too much information and it doesn't improve the quality of decision making, it reduces it. So things like the AQR test, you know, the 5-test rule to assess the health of a newborn, you know, keeps it really simple. So in many ways, the simpler we can make it. And I always joke, you know, I've been involved in sort of helping to run pitches and, you know, judge agencies, you know, and things like that. And I've always said to clients, you know, who feel very sort of methodical about, oh, we've got to have these 10 criteria, we've got to do these things. And I said, no, forget about all that stuff, because actually you're just going to confuse the hell out of yourself and you make the wrong decision. Choose 3 criteria, the 3 that really matter, which is going to be like, you know, do you think, well, the most important is, do you think you could work with these guys? You know, there may be a couple of other, depending on what they're trying to do, you know, but fundamentally, you know, the less is more in these spaces. And another concept you probably heard about in behavior is an idea called anchoring. This idea that, you know, when you put a stake in the ground of something, you anchor people around it, and therefore people will then sort of navigate that, and that unconsciously influences you. You know, this is part of the wisdom. It's in the ground. So in this experiment, they gave to one group of people, said, what's the height of the tallest redwood? Is it more or less than 365? And to another group, they said, what's the height of the tallest redwood? More or less than 55 meters. And what is your, and then after both groups being asked, they get asked a follow-up question, what is the best guess about the height of the tallest redwood? And clearly, it's probably no surprise that the number, the 365, the 55, anchors you, and you stay fairly close to that number. So that's what happens in negotiation all the time. And as you can see, the actual, you know, the height of the tallest redwood is 116. So consequently, you know, what we anchor things into will automatically start to influence our perception of things. Yeah, another fun example quoted in the book is, you know, there was this supermarket and it did a test, and basically, you know, there were lots of Campbell soup and you could buy as many as you wanted to. But as soon as they put a constraint on it, it said customers could only buy 12 cans at one time. Who the hell ever buys 12 cans of Campbell soup? Anyway, basically, it got the average purchase up to 7. You know, because you anchored them to the number 12. And so therefore people say, oh, I don't want 12, but, you know, frankly, you know, blimey, there must be something going on. There's probably wisdom of the crowd going on here. So that happens there. Then another thing in perception is this idea of mental accounting, and what they sort of say is that, you know, a dollar is not a dollar is not a dollar. You know, it actually depends upon the way you see it. And basically, particularly in their first book, in Nudge, you know, they do talk a lot about this idea about, you know, how, you know, we've got to help people because people they put their money aside into their savings scheme for their holiday, but they're still paying 29% of interest on their credit cards. So actually, we've got to see money as, you know, it's the same stuff, but rationally, we have different places we put our money. And one of the concepts it talks about is the idea of sunk costs. So, you know, I don't know if you're like me, but, you know, in the old days, you used to make your Nescafe at home and it probably cost you a penny a cup. And then we then all invested in buying these Nespressos, you know, or whatever we bought. And basically what we then said, yeah, it was 29 pence a cup, but actually that's a lot cheaper. And we obviously anchor it to the cost of going to Costa or Starbucks or whatever. But actually what we're not doing, we are absolutely ignoring the fact we spent £200 buying the base unit itself and amortizing that cost. It's sunk cost. We forget about it. You know, and in terms of perception, he sort of goes on in the back of the book about happiness. And I just thought it was quite interesting because it still says, and he says there are 2 types of ourselves. We have the remembered self, which is the narrative we put around ourselves. You know, and he talks about, you know, how on Facebook and things like this, we have our curated self, and, you know, we live through these photos and we remember the good things and all that stuff. And in many ways, photos create a very nice remembered self of all the good times, because we don't exactly keep pictures of the bad times when we crash the car and things like that. So actually, and then there's the experiencing self, the self we are in right now. And he comes up, you know, he's got a few little fun things, I think, you know, where, you know, he sort of says like, you know, happiness is time spent doing things we want to do minus time spent doing things we do not want to do. And he says that another nice, very simple model about the quality of our relationship is time spent making love minus time spent having rows is going to give you some definition of whether that couple are going to stay together or not. So he has these nice sort of very simple, you know, just, you know, wisdom phrase rather than anything else. And he talks about how, you know, actually, you know, happiness is, you know, is not found within money, you know, and, you know, this idea that, you know, below a certain amount of money it is a demotivator because you're desperate to try to get things, but above a certain amount, everything becomes, you know, you don't need of course you've got a slightly better car, but if you're stuck in a traffic jam in a Porsche or a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, it doesn't matter. You're still as stuck as if you're in a Citroen 2CV. You know, you're still in a car, you know, and how much bigger is a car? And fine, you might have got a nice little yacht, but, you know, you don't have Abramovich's yacht. But frankly, there's only so many rooms you can sit in one time. So actually you adjust to the new norm, and actually saying that the richer you come, the less exciting things are, because you don't have anything that really exceeds anything. So, you know, you've already eaten the fat duck and the gavroche and, you know, and il bully. And so, you know, every meal's a bit the same. You know, there are those exceptional things, you know. And, you know, he also talks about reverting to our norm base. So we all have a sort of a base level that we're at. So in an experiment, people who had dreadful accidents and become sort of quadriplegics, and, you know, after a period of time of adjusting back to life, they go back to the same sort of level of happiness. And people who won, you know, on the lottery, you know, they again adjust to the same level back. You know, just sort of pushing a couple of these things together. He talks a lot about the stock market, which is like mental accounting and power of loss and endowment all in one go. So he talks, example, let's say you bought two sets of shares, you paid $100 for each set of share, and one goes down and the other goes up. Because of our loss, you know, that, oh my God, I've lost so much money on this share that's gone down. And our sense of endowment, which is this idea of owning it, we don't want to let go of it. So they say, no, we're going to keep that share. We're going to keep that share because, you know, we want to get our money back. When actually, and the rest of then is we then sell the high performing stuff, which of course in logical is completely wrong. We must cut our losses and let go of stuff, which we find it really hard to go and do. And instead, you know, hold on to the high performing share. Another example it talks about, you know, it's all full of these nice little sort of examples and bits of experimental done, is a woman has purchased two $80 tickets to the theatre. And when she arrives, she discovers she lost the tickets. They've fallen out of her handbag. So she sort of goes to the counter, I'm sorry, I lost my tickets. I'm very sorry, without the tickets, you can't come, but you can buy 2 more tickets. And the query to the people who are taking this is, would you buy more tickets? And most people say, no, I wouldn't. I've already paid for them. I feel much annoyed about this. I'm not going to pay twice for the same show. On the other hand, when you say to them, a woman goes to the theatre intending to buy 2 $80 tickets, and when she arrives, she discovers the $160 cash she had has gone missing, will she buy the tickets? And most people say, yeah, of course she would. Because there's a divorcing going on between the two, because one is an endowment, like I already owe the tickets, I'm not going to pay twice for the same tickets, whilst the money is seen as a slightly separate product. Let's go on to the last bit, and then we'll break. And this idea of performance is regression to the mean. So it talks about this idea that, you know, when you get a low performing company and then in comes the new chief executive, and so, hey, presto, he's this amazing person. He's turned the company around. Or vice versa, you know, you've got this company that's overperforming, then something crashes. You know, you actually tend to find, well, that's not because that manager or that leader has done anything particularly amazing. It's just that by and large, most things have a cyclical nature. So markets, the stock market has a cyclical nature. Businesses have a cyclical nature. He talks about traders on the stock market. He talks about sports people have a cyclical nature. They go up and down. And therefore, there should be this acceptance that basically we'll have good and we'll have bad and we'll come back to a level, whatever it is. And clearly, some sports people are performing a higher level than others do. And in terms of performance level, we overweight our own ability. So, you know, there's all that great phrase about 90% of drivers believe they are better than average, which of course doesn't make sense. And the same with teachers. You know, and therefore we tend to overweight our own ability. We have an optimism that goes on. And again, one of those other nice little sort of Kahneman simple formulas he has is success is a mixture of both innate or both a mixture of sort of talent and luck. But great success is actually only a little bit more talent and a heck of a lot more luck. And it just sort of recognizes, you know, that actually we underestimate the power that luck plays into what all goes on. So basically, just sort of, you know, that was my quick gander through it. So laziness, we basically like to find shortcuts and to make decision making as easy as possible, and that can sometimes lead us astray. Emotions are heavily influential and will change the way we see things. So we will overrate things because of the risk that we fear and the fear that we have about it. And if we're in a highly emotional state, then again, it's very difficult to be rational. Perception is that various things can influence us. So we have the Wisiati, the what you see is all there is. So we'll stick inside that frame. And we have Wisiao, which is what you see is all you. So in other words, unnecessary, irrelevant pieces of information can help prime and help shift our focus. And the last one was performance, this idea that actually we return to this norm and the fact that luck plays a very important part. So that's a quick gander on through it. I took slightly longer than I wanted to, but really just to sort of open the debate up, open any questions up. I will come off the show so we can talk some more and open this up to anyone who wants to ask any questions or pose any other points of view which they've got about it. You know, it's a very powerful new space, this behavioral economics. It's growing all the time. You've probably seen the Codex thing that just demonstrates how many different avenues is now suddenly being re-termed under the lens of behavioral economics.
Fantastic.
So questions, pose it in the chat as well if you want to.
I'm going to, anyway, if everybody wants to pile in with questions, I'm going to stop the recording there.